Off the rugged coast of Maine, where waves crash against jagged rocks and the wind howls through lonely cliffs, stand lighthouses that have guided sailors for centuries. These lighthouses are beacons of hope in the fog. But by night, they tell stories far darker than the ships they have saved. Shadows cling to the rocks. Mist rolls in thick across the water. And whispers drift from the lantern rooms, carrying voices from the past. Visitors report seeing ghostly figures pacing the cliffs, lanterns swinging though no one holds them. Some see sailors frozen in time, appearing to climb the stairs or peer through fogged windows. The rocks themselves seem alive, groaning beneath the weight of memory and tragedy. And a few who linger too long swear they are watched by eyes that belong to no living creature. Tonight, my dear friend, we journey along these haunted lighthouse rocks. We step across craggy cliffs. Peer into lantern rooms where shadows move. Listen to whispers that rise from the sea. We will uncover the most haunted lighthouse rocks in Maine. Where every flash of light carries a story. And every wave crashing against stone echoes the past. So tell me. If you were standing alone on a rocky lighthouse cliff at midnight, and you saw a figure emerging from the fog, lantern in hand. Would you step closer to see who it is? Or would you retreat to solid ground before the shadows reach you? Hello, my dear friend. I am so glad you are here tonight, safe and warm. Because the cliffs and lighthouses we are about to explore are not for the faint of heart. Maine's coastline is famous for its beauty, jagged cliffs, and historic lighthouses. Some lighthouses have been abandoned. Some were witness to storms that claimed lives. Some were built on rocks haunted long before the light first shone. Visitors have reported eerie phenomena. Lanterns flicker despite no electricity. Some have felt cold hands brush their arms or shoulders. The air along these lighthouse rocks at night is thick with moisture and memory. Fog rolls in from the ocean, masking edges and hiding figures. The rocks creak and groan, as though telling stories of sailors lost and keepers long gone. Some claim to have seen lights in the water, not from any boat, but moving like lanterns carried by the dead. Others have felt the floorboards tremble as if the past itself is walking beside them. Before we step into these haunted lighthouse rocks together, my friend, I want to ask you something. And I hope you answer it in the comments. If you were standing alone on a lighthouse cliff at midnight, and you heard a faint voice whisper your name from the fog, would you look to see who is calling, or would you retreat to the safety of solid ground, hoping the spirit lets you go? Take a deep breath. Steady your heartbeat. And let us explore the most haunted lighthouse rocks in Maine. Black Rock Lighthouse stands defiantly atop a jagged cliff, battered by relentless waves and gusting winds. By day, the lighthouse appears stoic, its whitewashed walls gleaming against the dark rock, the surrounding cliffs jagged and unforgiving. The ocean crashes below, sending sprays of saltwater into the air, and gulls will overhead, their cries piercing the coastal air. Visitors often remark on the isolation, the way the cliff seems to rise sharply from the sea as if protecting the lighthouse from the world beyond. As evening falls, the atmosphere shifts. Shadows stretch long across the rocky terrain, and the wind carries a low, mournful whistle. Figures are sometimes seen standing on the rocks at night, their outlines faint against the backdrop of crashing waves and moonlight. They move slowly, deliberately, yet when approached, they vanish without a trace. Leaving only the sound of shifting stones and the distant roar of the ocean. Lanterns appear along the cliff edge, swinging gently though no one holds them. Their light flickers across the rocks, casting dancing shadows that seem alive, stretching and twisting over the jagged surfaces. Visitors report feeling watched, the sensation of eyes tracking their movements from the cliffs or from the lighthouse itself. The lanterns sway as if carried by invisible hands, illuminating paths that lead nowhere. And every step along the rocks is accompanied by a quiet, insistent sense of presence. The soundscape of Black Rock Lighthouse is unsettling. The waves crash with rhythmic power, yet there are other sounds layered atop them. Footsteps along the rocks, faint creaks of boards within the lighthouse. Whispers that drift on the wind. Sometimes drawing visitors closer, sometimes urging them away. Even those familiar with the terrain report disorientation, a subtle shifting of perception. That makes the rock seem steeper, the cliffs higher, the shadows deeper than reason dictates. The figures that appear are rarely described in detail, always half-seen, fleeting. Some are dressed in old maritime clothing, their forms blurred and spectral. Observers often feel a chill in the air when these figures appear, a coldness that penetrates through jackets and coats, leaving a lingering unease that persists long after the figures vanish. The lighthouse itself seems to pulse with a quiet energy. Its light, even when extinguished for maintenance, can sometimes be glimpsed sweeping across the ocean, rotating as though guided by hands unseen. Visitors report that the interior feels both familiar and alien, hallways stretched longer than they should be, rooms echoing with the sounds of activity where no one is present. The combination of the spectral figures, swinging lanterns, and unnatural sounds creates a sense that the lighthouse exists not only in the present but also in a realm overlapping with the past. Time behaves strangely at Black Rock Lighthouse. Minutes stretch and contract unpredictably. The wind changes direction without warning, carrying whispers that seem to call names or issue quiet warnings. Figures appear in multiple locations at once, vanishing from one area only to reappear on a distant rock or in a shadowed alcove of the lighthouse. Visitors often feel compelled to move toward these figures, drawn by curiosity, yet when they approach, the forms dissipate, leaving only the faint scent of salt and the sound of waves crashing below. The rocks surrounding the lighthouse are treacherous, yet they seem to host more than natural hazards. Stones shift with the movement of unseen beings. And small landslides occasionally reveal areas previously hidden. Some visitors report the sensation of being guided along the cliffs by invisible hands, their bodies pushed or pulled subtly towards certain locations. Whether the intention is protection, warning, or something else entirely is unclear. Yet the effect is undeniable, creating a tension that keeps footsteps cautious and hearts racing. Night at Black Rock Lighthouse is an immersive experience. Figures drift along the cliffs, lanterns swing without touch. Figures drift along the cliffs, lanterns swing without touch, footsteps echo across jagged stones. And whispers rise on the wind. The lighthouse appears both a beacon and a sentinel. A structure tied to the sea, the cliffs, and the unseen inhabitants of this place. Those who visit report a heightened awareness. An understanding that the space around them is alive with histories, presences, and movements beyond comprehension. As dawn breaks, the figures vanish, the lanterns extinguish, and the lighthouse resumes its quiet vigilance over the sea. The cliffs appear solid and unmoving, the ocean returning to its natural rhythm, and the wind softens to a coastal breeze. The wind softens to a coastal breeze. Yet visitors leave with a lasting impression, a sense that they have walked through a place existing simultaneously in the present and in a spectral memory. Black Rock Lighthouse endures, perched on the jagged cliffs, a guardian and witness to the invisible, where the boundary between the living and the unseen is as sharp and unforgiving as the rocks below. Even in daylight, the lighthouse casts long shadows over the cliff. The memory of the night, the swinging lanterns. The figures pacing the rocks, and the whispers that seem carried from another time. And the whispers that seem carried from another time, lingers long after leaving. The experience of visiting is unforgettable, leaving the visitor aware that some presences persist, silently observing from the jagged cliffs, enduring beyond the reach of time. Widow's Point Light stands perched on a jagged cliff, overlooking the restless sea below. During the day, the lighthouse appears solemn but peaceful, its white walls stark against the crashing waves and the dark stone of the cliffs. The wind carries the scent of salt and brine, and gulls circle lazily overhead. Yet as evening descends, a different presence awakens along the cliffs and within the lighthouse itself. The legend tells of a lighthouse keeper who vanished decades ago. Some say he was lost to the sea. Others that he never left at all. At night, ghostly figures are reported pacing along the cliff edges. Their forms faint and indistinct in the drifting fog. They move slowly, deliberately. Always near the precipice. Sometimes pausing to look outward over the water. As though waiting for someone or something to return. Soft cries drift through the fog, carried by the wind that sweeps around the cliffs. The cries mingle with the distant rush of waves, creating an atmosphere both melancholic and foreboding. The lighthouse is central to the haunting. Its light, which once guided ships safely through treacherous waters, now seems to pulse faintly in the darkness even when unlit. Some report seeing flickers of movement within the windows, shadows pacing the spiral staircase, though no one is visible when approached. The air inside the lighthouse grows cold, and a heavy silence dominates, broken only by the faintest sound of footsteps echoing on the wooden floors. Fog rolls in from the sea, enveloping the cliffs and lighthouse in a thick, misty shroud. Within this fog, the ghostly figures appear more distinct, their movements almost choreographed with the rhythm of the wind and waves. Some seem to float above the ground, gliding along the cliff edges, while others crouch near the rocky outcrops, watching the visitors who dare to approach. The fog distorts vision, making the distance between the cliff and the ocean uncertain, heightening the feeling that the edge could shift at any moment. Visitors describe a profound sense of being observed. A glance toward the cliff edge may reveal a figure that disappears when looked at directly. Or a shadow lingering just at the edge of vision. The cries seem to call from multiple directions at once. Echoing across the cliffs, around the lighthouse, and even across the sea. Some hear their own names whispered softly, carried with the wind in tones that feel both urgent and sorrowful. At the base of the cliffs, the rocks are slick with sea spray, and the sound of waves crashing against the stone is constant. Some who venture closer to the water report seeing pale shapes rise briefly from the mist, hovering just above the surface before dissolving into the fog. These fleeting images are never consistent, but they leave a lasting impression, as though the spirits of the vanished or lost are tied to the cliff and sea, moving between the two with silent purpose. The lighthouse itself seems to react to the presence of visitors. Doors may creak open slowly, despite the wind being calm. Shadows stretch unnaturally across walls and floors, sometimes seeming to follow movement. Visitors often feel sudden chills or the lightest of touches on their shoulders, as if unseen hands are brushing past them, guiding them, warning them, or simply acknowledging their presence. The combination of sights, sounds, and sensations creates an immersive, haunting experience that lingers long after departure. Time feels different at West Point Light. Minutes stretch into hours as visitors move along the cliff paths or ascend the spiral staircase. The wind, fog, and cries blend together, creating an environment that is at once mesmerizing and unnerving. Even those who visit with skepticism find themselves questioning what is real, as the interactions with the environment are too vivid to ignore. Every corner of the lighthouse, every shadow along the cliffs, seems to hold a story, a memory of the keeper or the spirits who remain. As dawn approaches, the fog lifts slowly, and the cries fade with the first light of day. The ghostly figures vanish, leaving the cliffs and lighthouse appearing once again serene and silent. Yet the sense of watchfulness remains, as if the place remembers the events of the night and awaits the next visitors to wander too close to the edge. Those who leave West Point Light carry with them the memory of the figures, the cries, and the cold brush of the unseen, a haunting that is quietly persistent and impossible to fully shake. West Point Light endures as a place where sea, fog, and spirits converge. The ghostly figures along the cliffs. The soft cries drifting through the fog. The flickering shadows within the lighthouse. And the unshakable feeling of being observed. Combine to create an experience that is both captivating and chilling. Visitors leave with a sense of having witnessed something beyond the ordinary. A reminder that the history of the lighthouse and its vanished keeper continues to echo through time. Carried on the wind and across the waves. A reminder that the history of the lighthouse and its vanished keeper continues to echo through time, carried on the wind and across the waves. Ashen Cliff Light stands atop a jagged promontory, overlooking the turbulent sea below. The lighthouse is tall and weathered, its white paint streaked with salt and wind. From a distance, it appears as a steadfast guide for sailors navigating treacherous waters. Yet, those who approach at night find a different reality. Thick fog rolls in from the ocean, swallowing the cliff and softening the sound of waves crashing below. The fog creates a sense of isolation, and within it, the lighthouse seems alive, a presence both watchful and silent. Visitors report figures climbing the stairs inside the lighthouse. They move slowly, deliberate and silent, ascending the spiral staircase that winds up to the lantern room. At first, the shapes appear translucent in the dim light that filters through the narrow windows. Some see them glance downward, as if aware of observers outside. Others notice the figures pause, then vanish as the observer's gaze shifts. There is no sound of footsteps, only the subtle sense of motion within the structure. Even when no one is inside, the feeling of movement persists, as though the lighthouse itself remembers the steps of those long gone. Outside, visitors feel cold hands brush their shoulders. The breeze from the cliff is sharp, carrying mist from the waves. Yet these touches are distinct and sudden, startling in their immediacy. Campers and hikers alike recount the sensation of being accompanied without seeing a form. A weight that passes over the skin for a moment before disappearing. The effect is chilling, and the fog enhances the sensation, creating a sense that the world around the lighthouse is fluid, shifting between the natural and the unseen. Fog distorts sound and vision. Lanterns inside the lighthouse glow faintly, though some report seeing them flicker even when no electricity is active. Shadows stretch along the stairwell, moving independently of the light. Observers note a sensation of being watched, whether from the windows, the stairs, or the empty observation deck at the top. The environment reshapes familiar landmarks, transforming the lighthouse into a space where perception is unreliable, and where the ordinary becomes uncanny. The spiral staircase seems endless to some visitors. Each step carries a heightened awareness, as though the building remembers those who have walked before. Figures on the stairs are sometimes glimpsed out of the corner of the eye, never fully forming. Their presence is fleeting yet undeniable. Sometimes turning to disappear into walls or mist. The sensation of anticipation grows as the lantern at the summit remains in view, a faint beacon that seems simultaneously welcoming and forbidding. Sounds play an important role in the experience of Ashen Cliff Light. The wind whistles through cracks in the masonry, echoing down the stairwell. A distant creak mimics the steps of a person ascending or descending, though no one is there. Waves crash below in rhythmic, hypnotic patterns, and the fog carries whispers that are difficult to discern. Some visitors believe these sounds are memories embedded in the structure, echoes of long-ago keepers who tended the light. Others sense a more deliberate presence, a consciousness moving through the lighthouse, observing each visitor with patient attention. The fog also changes the landscape outside the lighthouse. The cliff edge disappears into white haze, and familiar rocks become indistinct shapes. Lantern light glimmers through the mist, sometimes casting long, distorted shadows. Visitors report seeing shapes along the stairs inside, while outside, the fog seems to conspire with the lighthouse to guide perception. The combination of mist, cold air, and ghostly movement creates an environment where reality is suspended, and every step is laden with anticipation and tension. The combination of mist, cold air, and ghostly movement creates an environment where reality is suspended, and every step is laden with anticipation and tension. Visitors note a repetition in phenomena. Figures ascend the stairs at different times. Cold touches brush shoulders along the cliffside paths. Lanterns flicker in synchronization with steps and wind gusts. The lighthouse, fog and cliff create a continuous feedback loop of presence and perception. Each night reinforces the sense that the structure is alive with memory and intent. Those who linger report a constant awareness and understanding that the lighthouse observes and interacts subtly with those who approach. Ashen Cliff Light is a location where natural elements and spectral presence converge. The sensation of being accompanied, watched, and guided is pervasive, shaping visitor perception. Each climb of the staircase, each step along the cliffside path, becomes a narrative in itself, marked by subtle signs of presence. Hint at stories untold, of watchers unseen, and of time folded within the structure. The lighthouse remains a place of quiet tension. Figures may appear climbing the stairs. Lanterns flicker with no hand holding them. And touches brush shoulders along the cliff. Fog distorts and conceals, shaping the visitor's senses and creating a sense of otherworldly interaction. Observers leave with memories of movement, presence, and cold that linger long after departure. Ashen Cliff Light is more than a building. It is a locus of perception, where fog, light, and unseen figures combine to create an experience both captivating and chilling. Visitors often report returning to the lighthouse for repeated observation. Each visit reinforces previous experiences and offers new encounters. The fog shifts differently each night, figures appear in new patterns, and the lantern's behavior changes subtly. The spiral staircase remains central to the phenomena, a conduit for movement and memory. Each step feels purposeful, echoing the presence of watchers and the lighthouse's enduring vigilance over the cliff and sea below. Ashen Cliff Light leaves an indelible impression. Figures climbing the stairs, hands brushing shoulders, and flickering lanterns form an immersive narrative. The fog, the sea, and the lighthouse converge to create a landscape where reality and perception intertwine. Visitors walk away with a sense of being observed, of participation in a story that stretches beyond the immediate. A quiet understanding that this lighthouse holds both history and lingering presence within its walls, forever etched in the fog that rolls across the cliff. Ashen Cliff Light leaves an indelible impression. Hollow Bay Lighthouse stands on a rocky promontory, guarding a narrow channel where the waters churn and fog drifts in from the sea. Its tall, weathered tower pierces the mist, a sentinel over the restless tides. By night, the lighthouse transforms into a realm of shadows, flickering lights, and quiet movements that unsettle even the most seasoned visitor. Figures are often reported peering from the windows, their presence fleeting and almost imperceptible. They do not move as humans do, gliding silently across the rooms, their gaze fixed on the channel below. Observers claim these forms vanish when approached, leaving behind only the impression that they were never fully corporeal. The lighthouse seems alive with memory, holding echoes of keepers and visitors long gone, replaying fragments of their lives within its stone walls. Lanterns flicker in the mist, both inside the lighthouse and along the surrounding cliff paths. They hover as if guided by unseen hands, casting eerie reflections across the water and illuminating the fog in shifting, ghostly patterns. The lights appear and disappear unpredictably, creating a sense of motion and presence even when the tower itself is empty. Visitors often report stepping outside to follow the glow, only for it to vanish just beyond reach, as though teasing or warning them of what lies ahead. The sounds of Hollow Bay Lighthouse are as unsettling as its sights. The wind whistles through the gaps in the stone walls, carrying distant echoes that resemble footsteps on the creaking staircases. The channel below murmurs with waves, Yet at times, subtle thumps and knocks suggest movement where none should exist. Some hear soft voices drifting from empty rooms, conversations long ended that linger as whispers in the night. The combination of wind, water, and these uncanny sounds creates a living atmosphere of tension and anticipation. Visitors describe a pervasive feeling of being watched. Whether standing on the cliff edge or navigating the narrow spiral stairs, there is an awareness of unseen eyes tracking their movements. The lighthouse seems attuned to those who enter, responding subtly with flickering lights, shifting shadows, or the sensation of someone standing just behind. The presence is rarely aggressive, but it is insistent, a quiet insistence that the living are not alone here. History permeates every stone and timber of the lighthouse. Built decades ago to guide sailors safely through the treacherous channel. It has witnessed countless storms, shipwrecks, and disappearances. Some believe that the figures seen in the windows are former keepers, eternally tending the light, or lost souls of those who perished at sea, drawn back to the place that once meant safety or doom. Lanterns flicker as if signaling the past. Shadows glide as if retracing steps long taken. And the channel below reflects memories as much as water. Fog thickens unpredictably around the cliffs, swallowing the tower and its surroundings in a gray haze. Shapes appear and vanish in the mist, figures standing at edges of windows or along narrow ledges, visible only briefly before retreating. The lighthouse beam sweeps across the channel, yet it sometimes illuminates forms that do not belong to the living world, silhouettes that fade as quickly as they appear. Every movement feels purposeful, a silent communication from the unknown. Even the physical sensations of the lighthouse are unnerving. Cold drafts brushing against skin where none should exist. Floorboards creak beneath invisible weight. And at times, objects seem to move slightly. Lanterns tilting or doors shifting as if influenced by unseen hands. The combination of sensory anomalies, sight, sound, and touch, creates a fully immersive experience that heightens the tension and mystery of the place. Heightens the tension and mystery of the place. That heightens the tension and mystery of the place. Repeated patterns have been noted. Figures often appear in the same windows, lanterns flicker along the same paths, and whispers echo from the same rooms. Figures often appear in the same windows, lanterns flicker along the same paths, and whispers echo from the same rooms. The spiral stairwell seems to trap visitors in a rhythm of perception and reality, leading them past familiar spots where spectral phenomena recur. This repetition suggests an intelligence behind the occurrences, a guiding presence or memory that maintains the lighthouse as a nexus of haunting activity. Observers describe moments of profound eeriness. Standing at the cliff's edge, looking across the channel, one may catch sight of a figure tracing the waterline. Or notice a lantern floating near the rocks, moving as if guiding or warning. Shadows shift independently of natural light, bending around corners. Or appearing at the top of stairs just before disappearing. Even in the silence of the night, there is a constant awareness of presence. A sense that the lighthouse itself watches and interacts with those who come near. Hollow Bay Lighthouse is not merely a structure but a threshold between the world of the living and the unseen. Each visit carries the imprint of the past, a blend of spectral forms, flickering lanterns, and the soundscape of wind and water transformed into something otherworldly. Figures appear and vanish, lights drift without source, and the channel reflects more than just the moonlight. It mirrors the memories and presence held within the lighthouse walls. Those who leave the lighthouse often report sensations lingering long after departure. The touch of a cold hand on the shoulder, the echo of footsteps on the stairs, or the memory of a flickering lantern remain vivid in the mind. Hollow Bay Lighthouse continues to hold its mysteries, drawing curiosity and caution alike. It is a place where history, nature, and the spectral converge, where the mist carries voices, lanterns float without hands, and figures peer from windows in silence. Hollow Bay Lighthouse endures as a sentinel, not just for sailors but for the echoes of the past. Its lights, shadows, and sounds create an immersive, haunting environment, reminding every visitor that the boundary between the living and the spectral is fragile, and that some places hold memories that never truly fade. The channel, the cliffs, and the tower are alive with history and presence, ensuring that those who venture near Hollow Bay Lighthouse will never forget the encounter, carrying the awareness of its haunting long after they depart. The lighthouse, weathered and time-worn, stands atop black rocks that plunge sharply into the turbulent waters below. The rocks themselves are slick and unforgiving, and the lighthouse seems to cling to them with a stubborn resolve, a lone guardian watching over the ocean. As night falls, the landscape transforms. Moonlight casts a pale glow across the water, and the surface appears tinged with red, a strange and unnerving hue that ripples with every wave. The wind rises from the sea, carrying the scent of salt and the faint, metallic tang of the rocks. Figures are sometimes seen emerging from the jagged stones, rising slowly from the water, their forms dimly illuminated by the moon's eerie light. They move with a deliberate, almost ritualistic grace, as though guided by some unseen purpose. Visitors report hearing whispers in the wind, soft voices calling their names or murmuring words too faint to understand. The whispers seem to emanate from the rocks themselves, from the water, and from the lighthouse, as if the entire area is alive with hidden presences. Lanterns appear along the cliffs, swinging gently, though no hand holds them. Their light casts flickering shadows across the water, highlighting the restless movement of the figures that rise from the rocks. Figures rise from the rocks. The lighthouse is a place where time feels suspended. The boundary between past and present blurs as shadows pace along the cliffs, and waves strike the jagged rocks below. Observers sometimes feel cold hands brushing against their arms, or a sudden shiver of awareness that suggests another presence is near. Every sound is amplified: the lapping of waves, the creaking of the lighthouse doors, the distant hum of the wind. Until the night itself seems alive, observing and aware of every movement. The figures that emerge from the rocks are never fully clear. Some appear draped in old maritime clothing, soaked from the water, their features indistinct and shifting like reflections in the moonlit waves. Others are more ethereal, fading in and out of view, leaving only the impression of form and movement. Those who encounter them describe an overwhelming sense of being watched, a pull toward the edge of the rocks, and a compulsion to follow, though those who comply often find themselves disoriented, standing on wet stones with no memory of how they arrived. The red glow of the water intensifies the feeling of unease. It seems to pulse with the rhythm of the waves, bathing the rocks in a color that is both beautiful and menacing. Figures rise and fall with the water, sometimes approaching the cliffs, sometimes retreating into the depths. The whispers grow louder, almost conversational, yet no one is seen speaking. Visitors report hearing their own names spoken by unseen mouths, voices that carry the texture of age and sorrow, warning and beckoning at once. The lighthouse itself seems to respond to the presence of the figures. Doors creak, lights flash faintly, and the stone walls hum with energy that cannot be explained. Shadows stretch and twist unnaturally, as though the light itself bends to reveal hidden shapes. Even the air feels heavy, charged with the memory of the sea, the rocks, and the unknown entities that dwell there. Visitors often describe a sensation of being drawn into the water, a pull that is subtle at first and then insistent. The rocks seem to shift beneath their feet, or perhaps it is the influence of the figures themselves, guiding or warning. Those who linger too long feel the cold of the water without immersion, a chilling presence that cannot be shaken. Every glance toward the moonlit water brings the sight of movement, figures rising, descending, shifting just beyond the edge of perception. Time at Bloodwave Rock light is deceptive. Minutes can stretch into hours. The rhythmic crashing of the waves becomes a heartbeat that synchronizes with the rising and falling of the spectral figures. The whispers continue, now interwoven with the sound of the lighthouse itself. The distant hum of the rotating light. The creak of timber under strain. The whistle of wind through cracks in the stone. The entire location becomes a theater of tension, anticipation and the uncanny, leaving visitors both awed and unsettled. By dawn, the figures retreat, dissolving into the sea, and the water loses its red shimmer, returning to a natural gray-blue. Lanterns vanish, the whispers fade, and the lighthouse appears once more as a steadfast structure atop the cliffs, silent and solitary. The lighthouse appears once more as a steadfast structure atop the cliffs, silent and solitary. Yet the memory of the night lingers. Visitors leave with an awareness that the water, the rocks, and the lighthouse harbor presences beyond the reach of ordinary perception. Bloodwave rock light endures as a liminal space, a place where the sea, the rocks, and spectral forms converge, a place where the living and the unseen meet in perpetual twilight. Those who return speak of an uneasy pull, a curiosity mingled with dread. The moonlit red water, the rising figures, the whispering voices, and the swinging lanterns remain imprinted on the memory. A haunting tableau that refuses to fade. Bloodwave rock light is more than a lighthouse, it is a guardian of mysteries. A monument to the unseen. And a place where the boundary between the living and the spectral is as jagged and unyielding as the rocks themselves. Ironhook Lighthouse stands perched on jagged cliffs, overlooking the restless sea. Its stone walls have withstood decades of storms, salt, and wind, yet the structure holds a history far older than the waves that crash beneath it. By day, it appears solemn and steadfast, a guide for sailors navigating the dangerous coastline. By night, the place transforms into something far more mysterious, a site of strange occurrences and unsettling presence. Old lanterns swing gently on their own, moving even when the air is still. The light they cast is faint and irregular, flickering across the stone walls and stairwells, giving the impression that some Ania or something is pacing above. Visitors report feeling sudden chills as if the temperature drops whenever the lanterns sway. And the faint glow of the lamp seems to stretch long shadows along the spiral staircase, elongating them unnaturally. Figures are often seen crouching along the cliffs at the edge of vision. They are pale and indistinct, blending with the fog that rolls in from the sea. Some remain motionless, watching silently, while others move in sudden, jerking motions, before vanishing completely. The cliffs themselves seem alive at night. The rocks echoing soft footsteps that belong to no living person, following them even when they turn to see nothing but stone and surf. Inside the lighthouse, the atmosphere is equally haunting. Footsteps echo along the empty stairwells, moving in patterns that do not correspond to any visitor present. The faint rustle of movement is often accompanied by a low, indistinct hum, a sound that seems to come from the walls themselves, resonating with the history embedded in the stone. Fog drifts in from the ocean, wrapping the lighthouse and cliffs in a dense shroud. Within this mist, the figures on the cliffs appear more defined. Some are crouched as if searching for something lost, while others seem to glide along the edges, moving closer to those who venture near. Others seem to glide along the edges, moving closer to those who venture near. The combination of fog, shadows, and the swinging lanterns creates an immersive, almost cinematic scene, where the boundaries between land, sea, and spirit are blurred. Visitors often report a sense of being watched, a feeling that grows heavier the closer they come to the lighthouse. Shadows stretch across walls and floors, sometimes flickering as if reacting to movement. The faint scent of salt and damp stone fills the air, occasionally mingled with the smell of smoke, though no fire burns. Some have felt the lightest touch on their arms or shoulders, a brush of unseen hands that leaves the skin tingling long after. The cliffside paths around Ironhook Lighthouse are equally eerie. Rocks glint faintly under the moon. And sudden movement is often perceived in the corner of the eye. Figures crouch or stand along the edge, sometimes peering toward the visitors, other times moving in sync with the crashing waves below. The fog amplifies sound, making whispers seem to come from multiple directions at once. And the air carries an unsettling mixture of the oceana's roar and low, indistinct murmurs. Time itself feels altered near Ironhook Lighthouse. Nights stretch and compress in unusual ways. The fog and echoes creating an impression of timelessness. Visitors often report losing track of how long they have been there, feeling both drawn forward by curiosity and held back by unease. The lighthouse, cliffs, and surrounding waters seem to maintain a memory of every event that has occurred here. And those who enter feel the weight of that history pressing silently upon them. Even as dawn approaches, the lighthouse retains its atmosphere. Lanterns swing briefly, shadows linger in corners, and faint echoes of footsteps continue along the stairwells. The figures on the cliffs vanish with the first light, leaving only the stark white walls and jagged rocks. Yet the memory of movement, whispers, and the brushing of unseen hands lingers, etched in the minds of those who have dared to explore this place at night. Ironhook Lighthouse endures as a sentinel over the sea, its stones holding the stories of the past, of keepers long gone, of ships lost, and of spirits that refuse to leave. The swinging lanterns, crouching figures, and echoing footsteps create a haunting experience that is both unsettling and compelling. Every visitor who walks its stairwells or approaches the cliffside paths leaves with a sense that the lighthouse is alive. A place where the boundary between the living and the unseen is thin. And where the night reveals a world that exists beyond ordinary perception. In the end, Ironhook Lighthouse is more than a structure. A guardian of memory, a stage for silent watchers, and a place where the wind, fog, and shadows converge. The lanterns may sway without wind, footsteps echo without a person. And figures crouch along the cliffs unseen, yet the experience is vivid and undeniable. Those who witness it leave carrying the echoes of the night. The feeling of being observed. And the quiet knowledge that some things along the cliffs and within the lighthouse are not meant to be understood, only respected. Mistvale Light sits perched on the edge of steep cliffs overlooking a restless sea. The lighthouse is weathered and ancient, its whitewashed walls streaked with salt and wind, standing as a solitary sentinel over jagged rocks and dark waters. At sunset, the cliffs are bathed in fading gold, but as night falls, fog drifts in, thick and heavy, swallowing the landscape and softening the sound of crashing waves. Within this shroud, the lighthouse transforms, its presence both protective and unsettling, a silent witness to all who approach. Visitors often notice figures appearing in the mist. They emerge briefly from the white haze, tall and still, as if suspended in time. Some seem to follow the cliffside paths, moving with deliberate slowness, their forms partially obscured by the fog. Others appear atop the rocks, watching the edge of the sea. Their presence is fleeting, sometimes glimpsed only in the corner of the eye, but unmistakable to those who are attuned to the subtle shifts in the mist. Observers describe a sense of being observed in return, an awareness that the cliffs themselves are alive with unseen watchers. Glowing eyes are a frequent phenomenon reported by visitors. From within the jagged rocks and dense fog, small points of light shine briefly, illuminating features that seem almost human but impossible to identify. Some describe the eyes as amber or green, flickering in and out like lanterns in the haze. The effect is hypnotic and unsettling, suggesting that movement is occurring even where none should exist. The eyes are rarely stationary, sometimes disappearing as quickly as they appear, leaving only the sound of the wind and distant waves. The cliffs themselves play a central role in the atmosphere of Mistvale Light. Jagged rocks rise sharply from the water, forming ledges and narrow paths that are treacherous in clear weather, and nearly impossible to navigate in fog. The mist softens their edges, creating illusions of floating figures or shifting shadows. Footsteps echo oddly along the cliffs, sometimes in places where no human could safely tread. Visitors often feel a pull toward these edges, a subtle urging to approach, even as the mind warns of danger. The lighthouse serves as a focal point in the phenomena. Its lantern shines faintly through the fog, cutting arcs of light into the swirling mist. Though the building is abandoned, observers describe the movement of shadows along the windows, suggesting the presence of watchers or echoes of past keepers. The flicker of light, the hum of the wind, and the distant roar of the sea combine to create an immersive environment where perception and reality blend seamlessly. Sounds in the area are distorted by fog and cliffside acoustics. Waves crash against the rocks, echoing like distant drums. The wind whistles through cracks in the cliffs, producing tones that mimic whispered voices. Visitors report hearing low murmurs, sometimes carrying words in an unfamiliar language. Footsteps and the subtle scraping of rocks contribute to a sense that movement is occurring all around, yet nothing visible is present. These auditory cues enhance the perception of figures in the mist and glowing eyes watching from the cliffs. The mist itself is ever-changing, shaping the experience of each visitor uniquely. Shapes form and dissolve, cliffs appear closer or farther, and figures seem to move in ways that defy logic. The lighthouse, the cliffs, the sea, the foga interact to create an uncanny narrative that shifts moment by moment. Visitors describe a feeling of being inside a living painting, where every element of the lighthouse, the cliffs, the sea, the foga interacts to create an uncanny narrative that shifts moment by moment. Observers frequently describe cold touches along their arms or shoulders while navigating the cliffside paths. The temperature drops suddenly, as though the mist itself carries the sensation of another presence. Visitors often experience heightened awareness and tension, aware that the environment is both alluring and dangerous. Every step requires attention, yet curiosity drives exploration deeper into the mist-shrouded cliffs. Repeated visits reveal patterns in the phenomena. Figures appear in similar locations along the cliffs. Glowing eyes recur on certain rocks. And the Lighthouse's spiral staircase continues to suggest movement. Observers report that each encounter leaves a lasting impression. A feeling of participation in an ongoing story written by the cliffs, the lighthouse, and the mist. Mistvale Light is a place where natural elements and the supernatural intertwine. Fog, cliffs, sea, and wind merge with glimpses of figures, flickering eyes, and subtle touches, creating an environment that is both mesmerizing and unsettling. Visitors are drawn into a narrative that is constantly shifting, where the line between reality and perception blurs. The lighthouse stands as a silent guardian, a landmark around which the mist, figures, and glowing eyes converge, creating a space alive with memory, presence, and mystery. The experience of Mistvale Light lingers long after departure. Glowing eyes, moving figures, and the sensation of unseen hands create memories. Visitors recount details vividly of the shapes of cliffs in fog, the staircase inside the lighthouse, the patterns of movement in the mist, and the sounds carried by wind and water. These impressions form a lasting sense of awe, fascination, and unease, marking Mistvale Light as a place where the natural and supernatural coexist, waiting silently for those who approach the cliffs and the fog. For those who stand on the cliffside paths or peer through the lighthouse windows, the phenomena are impossible to ignore. Figures move, eyes glow, and cold touches reinforce the presence of something beyond the ordinary. The cliffs, the mist, and the lighthouse converge to create an environment that feels alive, responsive, and perceptive. Every visit provides a unique experience, each encounter reinforcing the sense that Mistvale Light is more than a location. It is a space imbued with memory, watchfulness, and enduring mystery, shaped by fog, rock, and the unseen watchers who inhabit the cliffs. Shadow Peak Lighthouse stands atop the highest cliff along a jagged coastline, a solitary sentinel against the relentless sea. Its towering structure commands the view for miles, yet its isolation gives it an air of quiet foreboding. The waves crash against the rocks below, sending spray high into the air, while fog rolls in from the horizon, swallowing the edges of the cliffs and turning the world into grey mystery. Even in daylight, the lighthouse exudes a solemn presence, but by night, it transforms into a place alive with shadows, whispers, and the unseen. Figures are often seen pacing along the balcony, moving with deliberate, silent steps. They do not respond to calls or gestures and vanish when approached. Observers describe a sense of weight and awareness, as if the lighthouse itself watches and protects these fleeting forms. They appear as echoes of those who once tended the light, or perhaps as guardians of the cliffs, bound to the tower by memory or purpose. The balcony, with its iron railing and sweeping view of the sea, becomes a stage for these apparitions, caught between the world of the living and the unseen. Visitors feel a presence behind them as they climb the spiral staircases. The steps creak under their weight, yet there are moments when an unseen hand seems to brush along their back. Or a cold draft follows them despite windows being closed. Shadows shift in the corners of vision. And faint movements are glimpsed on the balcony above. Every step taken is accompanied by the awareness that the living are not alone here. That something watches, waits, and perhaps guides. Lanterns inside the lighthouse flicker without wind or cause. Their glow casts long, wavering shadows across the walls, illuminating the spiral stairwell in intermittent light. The flickering seems deliberate, almost communicative, as if the building itself is aware of each movement. Observers report shapes standing silently in doorways, vanishing when fully noticed. And lights drifting along the floors with no source. The lighthouse is alive with presence, a combination of memory, spectral energy, and the raw power of the sea that surrounds it. The sounds are equally unsettling. The wind moans around the cliff face, carrying with it faint, indistinct whispers that seem to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Steps echo along empty halls. And at times, the distant crash of waves mingles with the impression of someone walking beside or behind a visitor. These sounds create tension and anticipation, drawing attention to the space as if every corridor, every landing, and every window is charged with unseen life. Even when silent, the lighthouse hums with the memory of those who lived, worked, and perished within its walls. History clings to every stone of Shadow Peak Lighthouse. Built decades ago to warn sailors of the cliffs below. It has witnessed storms, shipwrecks, and lives lived in isolation. The figures seen on the balcony are said to be former keepers or lost souls of those who perished at sea, returning to the tower that once meant guidance, protection, or despair. Their pacing along the balcony is steady and ritualistic. A replay of duties once performed, or perhaps a warning to the living who venture too close to the edge of the cliffs. Fog often envelopes the lighthouse, reducing visibility to mere inches. Figures appear and vanish within this mist, standing at windows or along the balcony, visible only briefly before retreating. The beam of the lighthouse sweeps across the fog, and sometimes illuminates shapes that cannot be attributed to the living. Shadows move independently, slipping along walls or around corners. Even the most casual observer cannot escape the sense that the lighthouse responds to them, guiding attention, shaping perception, and reinforcing the presence of the unseen. Visitors report a variety of physical sensations. Sudden chills, the feel of fingers brushing against the shoulder, and creaking floorboards under invisible weight are common. Objects appear to shift subtly, lanterns tilt, and doors move without cause. These anomalies heighten the atmospheric tension, blurring the line between natural occurrences and supernatural presence. Each movement, each sound, each flicker of light becomes part of a living environment that responds to curiosity, fear, and attention. Patterns recur in Shadow Peak Lighthouse. Figures often appear in the same locations, footsteps echo in predictable rhythms, and lanterns flicker in familiar sequences. The repetition suggests intelligence or memory, guiding, observing, or interacting with those who enter. Visitors often notice the same shadows or shapes multiple times during a single visit, as if the lighthouse itself maintains a record of its occupants, both past and present. Even the landscape surrounding the lighthouse contributes to its haunting. The cliffs are jagged and unforgiving, waves crashing relentlessly below. Mist and fog obscure the edges, and the channel stretches out into the unknown. Figures are glimpsed along the cliffs, sometimes pacing the balcony above, sometimes appearing at the edge of vision among rocks and spray. The isolation of the lighthouse amplifies every sound, every movement, and every sense of being observed, creating a fully immersive experience that engages sight, sound, and intuition. Those who leave Shadow Peak Lighthouse often carry the experience with them. The sensation of presence, the memory of moving figures. The flickering lanterns, and the sound of footsteps linger long after departure. The cliffside, the tower, and the mist hold memory and presence. Ensuring that visitors are aware of the boundary between the living and the unseen. A place where figures pace along balconies. Lanterns glow without source. And the sea and wind carry whispers of memory and watchfulness. Shadow Peak Lighthouse stands as a sentinel. Not only for sailors but for the echoes of the past. A place where figures pace along balconies. Lanterns glow without source. And the sea and wind carry whispers of memory and watchfulness. For the echoes of the past. A place where figures pace along balconies. Lanterns glow without source. And the sea and wind carry whispers of memory and watchfulness. Ensuring that visitors are aware of the boundary between the living and the unseen. Shadow Peak Lighthouse stands as a sentinel. Not only for sailors but for the echoes of the past. A place where figures pace along balconies. Lanterns glow without source. And the sea and wind carry whispers of memory and watchfulness. For the echoes of the past. A place where figures pace along balconies. Lanterns glow without source. And the sea and wind carry whispers of memory and watchfulness. Ensuring that visitors are aware of the boundary between the living and the unseen. Shadow Peak Lighthouse stands as a sentinel. Not only for sailors but for the echoes of the past. A place where figures pace along balconies. Lanterns glow without source. And the sea and wind carry whispers of memory and watchfulness. For the echoes of the past. A place where figures pace along balconies. Lanterns glow without source. And the sea and wind carry whispers of memory and watchfulness. Ensuring that visitors are aware of the boundary between the living and the unseen. Shadow Peak Lighthouse stands as a sentinel. Not only for sailors but for the echoes of the past. Shadow Peak Lighthouse endures as a place where history, memory, and spectral presence converge. Figures appear, shadows shift, lanterns glow, and the wind carries whispers. Every visitor feels the weight of unseen eyes and the brush of presence, a reminder that the lighthouse is more than stone and light. It is a vessel for the spirits that linger on the highest cliffs, observing, pacing, and watching over the channel below. Dead Man's Point juts sharply into the restless sea, a jagged promontory surrounded by turbulent waters. The rocks are slick with salt and spray, shaped by centuries of relentless waves. By day, the cliffs are forbidding but unremarkable, the site of old shipwrecks scattered along the base. Remnants of vessels broken against the unforgiving stone, and gulls will overhead, calling in mournful cries. Driftwood and rusted metal litter the shoreline, and the sea stretches out to the horizon. And gulls will overhead, calling in mournful cries. As night falls, the point takes on a different presence. Figures begin to emerge, rising slowly from the jagged cliffs and the shallow pools among the rocks. They move with a quiet purpose, their forms pale and indistinct, sometimes appearing drenched in sea spray, sometimes as faint outlines that shimmer and waver in the moonlight. Observers feel the air grow heavier as if the night itself is charged with unseen eyes. Visitors report hearing faint cries carried on the wind, the sound rising and falling with the rhythm of the waves. The voices are sorrowful, almost pleading, yet no human presence is visible. The wind seems to carry fragments of old conversations, the sounds of struggle and fear from shipwrecks long past. Every footstep on the rocky path is echoed back with uncanny clarity, as if the cliffs themselves are repeating the sounds of the past. The figures that appear at Deadman's Point are never fully formed. Some resemble sailors, their outlines blurred and shifting like reflections on water. Others are more ghostly, fading into the shadows of the rocks only to reappear moments later at another edge or pool. Those who linger too long often feel a compulsion to move toward the water, as if drawn by some invisible force, yet the rocks beneath their feet are treacherous and unyielding. The rocks and water interact with the light in strange ways. Moonlight glimmers off the wet surfaces, revealing figures just on the edge of perception. Shadows stretch unnaturally, sometimes detaching from the forms they belong to, creating the impression of movement beyond human understanding. The sound of waves crashing is punctuated by soft thuds, like footsteps on stones, yet when visitors turn to look, the space is empty. Lanterns sometimes appear along the cliffs, swinging gently as if held by hands unseen. The cries carried by the wind are not constant but come in waves, rising and fading with the tide. Listeners describe the voices as soft and mournful, sometimes repeating their own names or whispering incomprehensible words. The wind bends and shifts, carrying these sounds from the rocks below to the cliffs above, making it feel as though the entire landscape is alive with memory and grief. Even the air feels different, colder and heavier than the night around it, pressing down with a subtle weight that makes the presence of the unseen tangible. Time at Deadman's Point is distorted. Minutes stretch and contract. The rhythmic pounding of waves can feel like a heartbeat that synchronizes with the movement of the figures. Some visitors describe the sensation of being observed from multiple angles at once. A feeling of encirclement by forms that cannot be fully seen. The spectral figures rise and fall with the tide. Some glide across the rocks toward the water, while others remain perched on jagged edges, their outlines blurred by spray and moonlight. Every movement seems deliberate, yet impossible to interpret. The cries from the wind grow louder. As the figures draw near, their presence felt rather than fully seen. Visitors feel the temperature drop. A cold seep that comes not from the wind but from the proximity of the unknown. By dawn, the figures retreat, dissolving into the rocks and water, leaving behind only the evidence of their passage, wet footprints, shifted driftwood, and the faint echo of voices fading with the wind. The water loses its eerie gleam, and the cliffs resume their silent vigilance. Yet the memory of the night lingers, a sensation of being watched, of walking among echoes of lives lost to the sea. Deadman's Point is more than a promontory. It is a threshold where history and memory converge. Where the sea keeps its own secrets. And the cliffs bear witness to centuries of shipwrecks and loss. The figures that rise from the rocks are the lingering spirits of those who met the water's wrath, calling softly into the night. A reminder of the fragility of life and the persistence of memory. The final shot of the desolate coastline, with the ghostly figures fading into the darkness. Visitors leave with the sound of distant crying. That it holds the past within its rocks and waves. Watching and waiting for those who come too close. Hollow Harbor Light stands as a lone sentinel at the edge of a mist-laden bay. The lighthouse itself rises tall and silent, its weathered walls streaked with salt and time. Surrounding it, the cabins and docks that once bustled with life now sit abandoned, their wood gray and splintered, rocking slightly in the gentle currents. By day, the harbor is quiet and still. But as night descends, the fog rolls in. transforming the area into an ethereal landscape of shadows and echoes. Figures appear gliding through the thick fog, moving silently along the edges of the docks. Their forms are vague at first, almost indistinguishable from the mist, but as they draw closer, the shape of a person becomes evident. They drift along the water's edge and vanish as quickly as they appear. Witnesses often report seeing them pause to watch from the boardwalk, their movements deliberate yet ghostly, as if tethered to the remnants of the harbor's past. Soft footsteps echo across the wooden planks, each creak amplified by the emptiness of the abandoned cabins. Even when no one is present, the sound persists, carrying a rhythm that mimics a cautious patrol. Occasionally, the planks beneath their feet groan with a weight that does not seem to belong to any living being, creating a tension that is both unsettling and compelling. The fog thickens as night deepens, enveloping the lighthouse and the surrounding harbor in a dense, white veil. Within this obscurity, shapes can be glimpsed moving with uncanny precision. Shadows stretch unnaturally, sometimes resembling figures frozen mid-step, watching silently as if keeping guard over the deserted port. The interplay of mist, dim light, and motion blurs the boundary between the living and the spectral, leaving visitors uncertain of what is real and what is imagined. Inside the lighthouse, the atmosphere is no less mysterious. The spiral staircase creaks under invisible weight, and the old lanterns sway gently without wind. Whispers seem to rise from the air itself, faint murmurs that echo through the hollow chambers. Some visitors report sudden drafts brushing past them, carrying the scent of salt and decay. While others feel the distinct chill of cold fingers grazing their arms. The lighthouse holds the history of countless nights, the presence of those who once tended its light. And the memory of travelers who vanished long ago. Along the docks, abandoned boats bob gently, their hulls scraping against decayed wood. The fog gives the water a glassy, silver quality, reflecting the vague silhouettes that drift above it. Visitors have described seeing figures crouched along the piers, motionless for moments that feel like eternity before gliding silently across the planks. These forms appear to repeat actions long forgotten, tending to tasks that existed when the harbor was alive. There is a rhythm to their movement, a quiet echo of a past that refuses to let go. The cabins surrounding the lighthouse are filled with remnants of lives once lived. Doors hang ajar, windows cracked and fogged, and furniture sits in the positions it was left decades ago. Within these structures, shadows move in ways that defy logic, sometimes crossing walls and floors without obstruction. Lanterns light and dim on their own, illuminating empty rooms just long enough for visitors to glimpse forms lurking in corners or crouched near doorways. The sound of soft, deliberate footsteps often accompanies these appearances, fading into silence only when the observer turns abruptly. Hollow harbor light creates an immersive experience where time seems suspended. Visitors often lose their sense of duration, wandering among the docks and cabins as if drawn by unseen hands. The fog thickens and thins unpredictably, altering perception and obscuring familiar landmarks. Figures glide along the water's edge, shadows flicker in abandoned windows, and soft footsteps follow along boardwalks. The combination of visual and auditory cues makes it impossible to ignore the sense that the harbor is alive in ways that defy explanation. The air itself carries a weight, a tangible presence of the harbor's history. The gliding figures, echoing footsteps, and swaying lanterns are reminders of lives once intertwined with this place. Some feel an invisible touch on the shoulder, a brief chill that leaves the skin tingling, while others hear whispers just beyond understanding, echoing across the docks and cabins. Every visitor leaves with the impression that the harbor remembers, and that some of its residents are unwilling to leave. By dawn, the fog lifts and the spectral activity subsides. Figures vanish into the morning mist, footsteps fall silent, and the swaying lanterns settle. The harbor appears still and empty, yet the memory of the night lingers. Visitors depart with the weight of unseen eyes upon them, a sense of history woven with the present, and the undeniable knowledge that hollow harbor light is more than a beacon for ships. It is a place where the past walks alongside the living, where shadows move with intent, and where the echoes of the night endure long after the fog has faded. Hollow Harbor Light remains a sentinel over the bayou, its abandoned docks and cabins a stage for phenomena that cannot be fully explained. The gliding figures, soft footsteps, and whispering fog create a haunting tableau that is both eerie and mesmerizing. Those who visit are forever changed, carrying with them the memory of shadows in the mist, lanterns that swing without wind, and the persistent sensation that some part of the Harbora's soul continues to watch and guide, silently, through every fog-laden night. Black Pine Lighthouse stands perched on a jagged cliff, surrounded by tall, dense pine trees. The air is heavy with salt from the sea and the crisp scent of pine needles. As twilight falls, shadows stretch long between the trunks, creating a tunnel of darkness that seems to guide visitors toward the lighthouse itself. The structure is weathered and isolated, its whitewashed walls streaked with years of wind and rain, yet it continues to shine faintly in the fog, a sentinel over the restless waters below. Visitors often report figures appearing between the pine trunks. They are fleeting and difficult to focus on, sometimes half visible in the mist that rolls in from the sea. Some figures are tall and motionless. Others seem to move slowly, pacing along the forest floor. The presence is subtle but undeniable. Those who venture close feel eyes watching from the darkness. A persistent awareness that the cliffs and woods are not empty. Cold fingers brushing against arms is a recurring sensation for many visitors. The touch is light, fleeting, and impossible to locate precisely. It happens when approaching the lighthouse path, walking among the trees, or peering out toward the edge of the cliffs. These touches leave a shiver that spreads quickly, heightening the sense of being observed and followed. Even the bravest feel the hairs on the back of their neck rise as the wind carries whispers through the pines. The lighthouse itself plays a central role in the mystery. Figures are reported climbing the stairs, appearing as shadowy silhouettes behind fogged glass. Lanterns flicker inside even when the building is known to be empty. Observers often see movement that cannot be explained by wind, animals, or light reflections. The lighthouse emits a quiet, almost imperceptible hum, blending with the distant crash of waves against the cliffs and the rustle of pines in the wind. The cliffs surrounding Black Pine Lighthouse are treacherous and steep. Rocks jut sharply from the earth, forming narrow ledges and jagged paths. Visitors often describe a feeling that the ground itself is alive, nudging them closer to danger or steering their steps in a certain direction. Shadows play tricks in the mist, appearing to move independently, elongating and shrinking, suggesting movement where none should exist. The mist acts as a veil, hiding details but enhancing the sense of presence, leaving visitors uncertain of what is real and what is imagined. Sounds in the area are distorted and haunting. Waves pound against the cliffside, echoing like distant drums, while the wind winds through gaps in the rocks and between the trees. Visitors report faint whispers carried on the wind, sometimes their own names, other times syllables they do not recognize. Footsteps echo across the forest floor, but when searched for, there is nothing there. These sounds combine with the cold touches and moving figures to create a pervasive sense of tension and unease. Glowing eyes are occasionally reported peering from the darkness between pines. Small, flickering points of light appear at the edge of vision, illuminating parts of a figure or cliff face. The eyes vanish when directly looked at, leaving only the shadow of trees and the distant glimmer of the lighthouse lantern. Observers describe a feeling of being studied, as if the cliffs, trees, and lighthouse themselves possess awareness and intent. The eyes, like the figures, seem to follow visitors' movements, appearing in new locations yet maintaining a consistent presence. Nightfall amplifies the atmosphere of Black Pine Lighthouse. Fog thickens along the cliffs, swallowing sound and softening the landscape. Figures become harder to distinguish, blending with the shadows of trees and rocks. Lantern light from the lighthouse cuts through the haze, casting fleeting shapes that vanish as quickly as they appear. The combination of mist, darkness, and movement creates an immersive, almost cinematic experience, where every sound, shadow, and touch feels purposeful and alive. Repeated visits reveal patterns in the phenomena. Figures often appear at similar locations along the cliffs, shadows linger in certain trees. And the lighthouse staircase continues to suggest movement inside the building. The mist shifts differently each night, yet the underlying presence remains constant. Observers report that the experiences leave lasting impressions. An awareness that Black Pine Lighthouse is a space of memory, vigilance, and hidden life. Waiting silently for those who approach the cliffs and the woods. The environment around the lighthouse is both alluring and dangerous. Jagged cliffs, thick forest, and swirling mist create a natural setting that commands respect. Figures, cold touches, whispers, and glowing eyes amplify the sense of mystery and presence. Every visit is unique, shaped by the interplay of light, fog, and the watcher-like figures. Even as visitors depart, the sensation of being followed or observed lingers, leaving a memory that feels tangible and real. Black Pine Lighthouse is more than a location, it is a convergence of natural elements and persistent phenomena. Fog, cliffs, pine forests, the lighthouse itself, and the figures that emerge from shadow combine to create an immersive and haunting environment. Visitors leave with stories of cold touches, glowing eyes, fleeting figures, and whispers that seem to originate from the cliffs and woods themselves. The lighthouse stands as a silent sentinel, a focal point for the strange occurrences that have fascinated and unsettled those who walk its surrounding paths. In the end, Black Pine Lighthouse remains a place where perception and reality intertwine. The mist, figures, cliffs, and lighthouse converge to create an experience both beautiful and unsettling. Every step along the paths, every glance at the cliffs, every flicker of light through the pines reinforces the sense that this is a place alive with hidden watchers. Visitors depart changed, carrying memories of unseen eyes, cold touches, and shadows that move independently, an enduring reminder that some spaces are governed by forces beyond the ordinary. Ghostlight rock rises sharply from the coastline, a jagged outcrop that juts into the restless sea. Waves crash violently against its base, sending salt spray high into the air, and fog often rolls in from the horizon, cloaking the cliffs in thick, gray mist. The air carries a chill that seems to seep into the bones, and the wind whistles through the cracks in the stone, producing an eerie, almost human, resonance. By day, the rock is a treacherous landmark, but by night it becomes a stage for the inexplicable, a place where the ordinary and the supernatural intertwine. Lanterns float along the cliffs without anyone holding them, drifting just above the rock's surface or hovering near the jagged edges. Their light is dim, flickering, but consistent, illuminating the fog with a ghostly glow. Observers describe the lanterns as moving deliberately, as if guiding attention to certain points on the cliffs, or perhaps tracing the paths of those who once walked here. The light is both alluring and unsettling, a quiet beacon that defies natural explanation. Figures appear standing silently beside the lighthouse perched at the highest point of Ghostlight Rock. They do not move unless approached, and when observed directly, they fade as if they were made of mist. Some visitors report seeing them turn their heads in unison, watching silently as the living traverse the rocky paths. The forms are often pale, sometimes indistinct, yet the sense of presence is undeniable. Their stillness is profound, as if time itself is suspended in their company, and the wind seems to bend around them, carrying faint whispers that cannot be understood. The fog amplifies every movement and sound. Visitors have reported the sensation of being followed. Hearing subtle movements behind them, only to turn and find the cliffs empty. The interplay of light, shadow, and mist creates a landscape in which perception is continuously tested. Every step forward seems to draw the observer deeper into a space that exists on the boundary between reality and something other. Lanterns flicker not only near the cliffs but also inside the lighthouse windows. The structure itself seems to participate in the haunting, as if the building contains the memory of those who tended the light in centuries past. The glass panes glow intermittently, casting long shadows across the rocky paths and emphasizing the isolation of the site. Those who have entered the lighthouse describe a heavy silence, punctuated by the faint creak of boards and the occasional shifting of air, as though something unseen moves within the walls. The figures beside the lighthouse often appear in recurring positions. One may stand near the main door, another pacing along the balcony, and yet another watching the edge of the cliff. These forms repeat their positions night after night, suggesting either memory or intention. Observers report that the lanterns seem to interact with the figures, floating closer or drifting away, as though the lights themselves acknowledge the presence of the unseen. The combination of forms and floating light creates an atmosphere thick with anticipation, where the viewer feels constantly observed yet unable to grasp the source. Sounds here are subtle yet insistent. The wind carries whispers that rise and fall with no discernible pattern, footsteps echo along empty stone paths, and the distant roar of waves mixes with the impression of voices calling faintly. Some visitors describe hearing names whispered on the wind, soft and urgent, urging movement or retreat. The sensory experience is immersive, engaging sight, sound, and intuition simultaneously, creating a narrative in which every flicker of light or shadow seems imbued with purpose. Figures are glimpsed perched near the edges, hovering just beyond reach, as though bound to the rock by duty or memory. Some describe the sensation of being guided, either toward the cliffs or back toward the lighthouse, as if the figures or lanterns influence movement without direct contact. Even the most cautious visitor cannot ignore their presence, the combination of light, mist, and spectral forms making it impossible to separate natural terrain from supernatural activity. The sensation of being guided, either toward the cliffs or back toward the lighthouse, as if the figures or lanterns influence movement without direct contact. Pale faces appear in the fog, fleeting and insubstantial, but undeniably human. Their expressions are neutral, often serene, sometimes solemn, reinforcing the impression that they are observers rather than participants. The fog allows only partial vision, heightening uncertainty, and creating an environment in which every detail is questioned, and every movement carries potential significance. Visitors who spend time on Ghostlight Rock often report lingering sensations long after departure. The glow of floating lanterns, the silent figures beside the lighthouse, and the faint whispers in the wind remain in memory, creating a vivid impression of a place alive with unseen activity. A shadow where none should exist, a light source that cannot be explained, a figure partially obscured by fog. The rock itself becomes a container for memory, observation, and presence, anchoring the experiences of the living to the echoes of the past. Ghostlight Rock endures as a site of mystery, where light, fog, and shadow converge to create an experience that transcends ordinary perception. Lanterns drift, figures appear, and pale faces emerge from the mist. The cliffs and lighthouse serve as a stage for recurring patterns, whispers, and subtle movements that engage every sense. Visitors leave with the certainty that the rock is more than a mere outcrop above the sea, it is a living, watching entity, preserving the memory and presence of those who remain unseen, yet undeniably present. Ashwood Lighthouse stands tall on the rocky coast, a solitary sentinel against the relentless sea. By day, it is quiet, its stone walls weathered and salt-streaked, the waves crashing below with a constant rhythm that seems to lull the structure into stillness. Seagulls circle overhead, their cries filling the air, but the lighthouse itself appears empty, abandoned except for the faint smell of sea spray and the occasional rustle of wind through its iron fixtures. As night falls, the lighthouse transforms. Shadows begin to move along the balcony, flickering with the motion of the lighthouse beam sweeping across the water. They are not fully human, nor are they entirely formless. Some appear to pace deliberately, their shapes elongated by the moonlight reflecting off the wet stone. The air grows cooler, heavier, carrying the scent of salt and damp stone. And the soft creak of the balcony railing whispers across the empty night. Footsteps echo across the stone floors, sometimes coming from the spiral staircase, sometimes from the top balcony, though no living soul is there. The sound is precise, deliberate, as if Summonia or Somethingga is retracing a nightly routine that began long before the lighthouse was automated. Visitors have described feeling watched, an invisible presence following them as they move through the narrow halls and chambers. Even the faintest shift in the wind seems amplified, carrying whispers that are impossible to locate. The balcony itself becomes a stage for the unseen. Their movements are slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial, as if reenacting tasks from a past life spent tending the light and guarding the shores below. The light beam rotates in its endless circle, illuminating their forms in sudden flashes, then leaving them in darkness again. Inside, the spiral staircase echoes differently at night. Shadows cling to the walls and corners, stretching unnaturally when the lighthouse beam passes through the windows. The stone floors feel cold underfoot. And at times a soft, rhythmic tapping can be heard, like someone walking just beyond the line of sight. The sound carries unnervingly, growing louder and softer as if the steps themselves are conscious of the listener. The lighthouse tower itself is the heart of this activity. Figures are sometimes seen standing near the lamp room, their outlines illuminated against the rotating glass of the lantern. They appear to be watching the water, scanning for unseen vessels, or perhaps waiting for something lost long ago. The wind whistles through the narrow windows, mixing with the faint sounds of movement and low, unintelligible murmurs. Some visitors feel a chill pass over them, a cold breath that seems to exhale from the walls themselves. The chambers beneath the lighthouse are equally alive. Dust motes shimmer in the moonlight, stirred by unseen movements. Steps echo in empty rooms, and shadows dart across the walls, following the contours of the stone. Occasionally, the sound of a door creaking open resonates, though every door is firmly closed. The lighthouse seems to possess a memory, a persistent echo of those who maintained the light and watched the horizon long before automation replaced human presence. Out on the balcony, figures pause at irregular intervals, turning to face the land, their forms wavering in the mist. The sound of footsteps behind the walls merges with the wind and the distant crashing of waves, creating a layered symphony of presence and absence. The lighthouse, though solitary, feels crowded with memories, with lives once devoted to vigilance and safety. The air grows colder as the night deepens. Visitors report that the stone walls themselves seem to hum, a low, resonant vibration that can be felt through the feet and the bones. Shadows lengthen unnaturally, moving against the patterns of light, and at times the faint outline of a figure can be seen at the top of the staircase, only to vanish when approached. The beam of the lighthouse illuminates the sea in fleeting moments, revealing nothing but the rolling waves, yet the presence on the balcony persists, visible only at the edge of perception. At the top, the lantern room holds the most intense activity. Figures appear and disappear within the light, their movements synchronized with the rotation of the beacon. Visitors often feel the sensation of someone standing directly behind them, yet when they turn, there is no one there. The air carries a faint smell of oil and salt, of the maintenance of the lamp long before automation, mingled with something intangible, something alive only at night. As dawn approaches, the figures slowly fade, retreating into the corners and shadows. Footsteps grow distant, whispers cease, and the lighthouse returns to its silent daytime state. The wind continues to whistle through cracks and windows, carrying the faint echo of activity that occurred while the world slept. Visitors leave with a sense of eyes watching and an invisible presence that remains even as the sun rises. Ashwood Lighthouse is more than a stone tower on a cliff. It is a sentinel of memory, a vessel where past and present converge. Shadows glide along the balcony, footsteps echo across the stone floors. And figures rise to continue tasks left behind decades ago. The lighthouse is never truly empty, it is alive with the lingering presence of those who dedicated themselves to its light. Keeping watch over the sea. And waiting silently for those who dare to enter their realm. Widowmaker Rock juts sharply above the landscape, a jagged formation weathered by wind and time. Its steep cliffs have been the site of multiple tragedies, each leaving a mark on the rock and the surrounding terrain. By day, the site seems barren and silent, the stones sun-bleached and cracked. But as evening falls, an eerie energy descends over the cliffs. Shadows shift unnaturally, and the wind carries sounds that do not belong to the natural world. Figures rise along the cliffs at dusk, their forms hazy and indistinct at first, as if emerging from the stone itself. Some appear to climb the vertical faces, moving with a quiet determination, while others stand at the edges, watching the valley below. Others stand at the edges, watching the valley below. Visitors report a sensation of being observed, a prickling awareness that the rock holds countless eyes. The figures do not speak, yet there is an unmistakable presence, a feeling that the tragedies of the past are replaying silently for anyone who dares to watch. Distant cries echo across the cliffs, carried on the wind. They are faint at first, almost imperceptible, but they grow as night deepens, forming a chorus of sorrow that seems to emanate from the rock itself. Whispers thread through the air, sometimes naming those who wander too close, other times offering indecipherable phrases. Visitors often report their own names whispered back to them, a personal connection to the unseen inhabitants of the cliffs. The path leading up to Widowmaker Rock is steep and narrow, lined with loose stones and gnarled vegetation. Each step brings a heightened sense of anticipation, as if the land itself is aware of the living moving among the echoes of the dead. Occasionally, the faint outlines of figures appear just beyond the tree line, only to dissolve into the night when approached. Lanterns carried by explorers sometimes flicker inexplicably, their light bending and stretching in impossible ways, illuminating shapes that are never fully there. Along the cliff edges, the air grows cold and heavy. Visitors describe a dampness that clings to clothing and skin, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and decay. Shadows stretch unnaturally across the rock faces, sometimes forming humanoid shapes that appear to mimic the movements of those nearby. Some claim to see figures frozen mid-step, as if caught in the final moments before falling, while others describe distant silhouettes pacing with a slow, deliberate rhythm. The cliffs themselves seem alive with memory. Figures appear to rise from the rock as if shaped by the tragedies themselves, climbing toward the sky or vanishing into the stone. Visitors report hearing sudden, sharp impacts, like a stone striking another. Yet no one is visible. The sound reverberates unnervingly, a reminder that the rock holds countless secrets just beneath its surface. Night deepens, and the cries and whispers grow stronger. Figures appear more defined, standing at the edges, watching the valleys and paths below. Their forms are faintly illuminated by moonlight, revealing clothing and postures that suggest lives interrupted. Some are seen crouching, others climbing, some frozen in gestures of fear or despair. The experience is immersive, leaving observers with the distinct impression that the cliffs themselves are a living memorial to those who met tragedy here. Wind gusts across the cliffs, carrying with it the whispers of the past. Visitors report feeling sudden chills, a brief brush of unseen hands, and the sensation of eyes upon them even when no figure is visible. The interplay of wind, shadow, and sound creates an environment where perception blurs. Shapes appear and disappear in the fog, and every footstep echoes unnaturally, as though answered by an unseen presence. By dawn, the figures fade and the wind calms. The cliffs return to their daytime silence, appearing empty yet still heavy with memory. The air remains thick with the residue of the night, the unseen eyes and whispered names lingering in the minds of those who passed through. Visitors descend the paths with a lingering awareness that Widowmaker Rock is more than a landscape of stone. It is a place where history, tragedy, and presence converge, a living memory etched into the cliffs themselves. Widowmaker Rock endures as a sentinel over the tragedies of the past. Figures rise, cries echo, and whispers persist, shaping an environment where the line between the living and the spectral is uncertain. Those who approach the cliffs leave with the haunting knowledge that the rock remembers, that the fallen and the lost continue to walk its edges, and that the echoes of sorrow will follow them long after the climb is complete. The experience of Widowmaker Rock is one of tension and awe. A continuous reminder that some places hold more than their physical form. The cliffs stand as witnesses to countless tragedies. The figures that rise along them as silent historians of pain and memory. Visitors are left with an indelible impression of the place. A haunting awareness that Widowmaker Rock is alive with the echoes of lives forever changed. And that each whisper, each figure, and each cry carries the weight of a history that refuses to be forgotten. Misty Point Light sits on a jagged promontory, overlooking restless waves that crash against the cliffs below. Each evening, fog drifts in from the sea, thickening as night falls and swallowing the landscape in a gray haze. The lighthouse itself is weathered, its white paint streaked with years of wind and salt. The beacon shines intermittently through the fog, casting long, fractured beams across the cliffs and water. A solitary guide for those daring to approach the rocky shoreline. As the fog thickens, figures begin to emerge. They are fleeting, half visible, and often vanish when directly observed. Some appear as dark silhouettes against the pale mist, standing motionless near the cliffs or slipping silently among the rocks. Their presence is subtle yet unmistakable. The figures move with purpose, sometimes pacing along the cliffs or peering toward the lighthouse, their intentions unclear but their presence undeniable. Unseen hands brush against visitors in moments of quiet. The touch is light, fleeting, and impossible to locate precisely. It occurs along the narrow paths, near the base of the lighthouse. And even atop the cliffs where the wind sweeps sharply. Those who feel it shiver involuntarily. Their senses heightened as if the fog itself is alive. Some describe a sense of being guided or herded by these invisible touches. A subtle pressure steering their steps and influencing their movements along the uneven terrain. Inside the lighthouse, movement is reported even when the building is empty. Lanterns flicker in the upper levels, shadows stretch across the spiral staircase. And footsteps echo faintly through the halls. Figures are said to climb the stairs, visible only for a moment before vanishing into the fogged windows. The lighthouse emits a low, almost imperceptible hum, blending with the crash of waves and the whisper of wind through the cliffs. Every sound seems amplified, every shadow elongated, creating a sense of persistent observation. The cliffs themselves are treacherous. Jagged rocks jut sharply, forming narrow ledges and steep drop-offs that demand careful navigation. Visitors often report that the ground seems to shift subtly beneath their feet, as if the earth itself were aware of their presence. Shadows play tricks in the fog, sometimes appearing to move independently of the landscape. Mist curls around the rocks and paths, hiding details and creating illusions that leave observers uncertain of what is real and what is imagined. Sounds at Misty Point Light are distorted and haunting. Waves pound the base of the cliffs, echoing like distant drums. While the wind whispers through cracks in the rocks and along the lighthouse walls. Some visitors report faint, unintelligible murmurs carried on the air, occasionally forming words or names they do not recognize. Footsteps echo across the cliff paths. Yet when searched for, no one is there. These auditory phenomena combine with fleeting touches and shadowy figures. Glowing eyes are occasionally seen in the fog. They appear between the rocks or among the sparse coastal vegetation, small points of light that watch silently. When approached, the eyes vanish, leaving only the swirling mist and the faint glow of the lighthouse beacon. Observers describe the sensation of being studied, of presence beyond human understanding lingering in the fog. The eyes, like the figures and touches, seem to follow visitors' movements, appearing in new locations yet maintaining continuity, as if part of a deliberate pattern. Nightfall transforms Misty Point Light into a world of shadows and uncertainty. The fog thickens, swallowing sound and softening edges, while the lighthouse beacon cuts through the haze with fractured light. Figures become harder to distinguish, blending with cliffs and rocks, appearing and disappearing in seconds. The combination of fog, darkness, and movement creates an immersive, almost cinematic experience where every sound, shadow, and touch feels intentional and alive. Repeated visits reveal patterns in the phenomena. Figures often appear in similar locations along the cliffs, shadows linger in familiar shapes. And the lighthouse staircase continues to suggest movement inside. The fog shifts differently each night, yet the presence remains constant. Many visitors report leaving with a lingering sensation, an awareness that the lighthouse and cliffs are watched, remembered, and inhabited by something beyond the ordinary. The environment is both alluring and dangerous, forming a cohesive sense of mystery and presence. That Misty Point light is alive with hidden watchers. Misty Point light is more than a lighthouse. It is a convergence of natural elements and persistent phenomena. Fog, cliffs, the lighthouse itself, and the figures that emerge from shadows combine to create an environment both beautiful and unsettling. Visitors leave with stories of cold touches, glowing eyes, fleeting silhouettes, and whispers carried by the wind. The lighthouse remains a silent sentinel, a focal point for the strange occurrences that have fascinated and unsettled those who approach the cliffs and foggy paths. Ultimately, Misty Point light endures as a place where perception and reality intertwine to create an experience both haunting and captivating. Every step along the paths, every glance across the cliffs, every flicker of light through the mist reinforces the sense of being observed by forces unseen. Throughout the visitants depart changed, carrying memories of unseen hands, shadowy figures, and glowing eyes. A persistent reminder that Blackroot Lighthouse stands alone on a narrow spit of rock, surrounded on all sides by the dark, unyielding waters of the bay. The ocean here seems heavier, its surface still and black under the moonlight. Waves lap silently at the foundation, producing only the faintest whisper, as if the sea itself holds its breath. The lighthouse rises tall and weathered, its white paint streaked with years of salt and storm, a lone sentinel against the encroaching darkness. Visitors report that the water near the lighthouse appears unnaturally black, absorbing the faintest traces of moonlight. Reflections are distorted or absent entirely, leaving a sense of depth and emptiness that unsettles the senses. The stillness of the bay is broken only by occasional ripples, seemingly rising without wind or tide, suggesting unseen movement beneath the surface. There is a profound sense that the water watches, and perhaps waits, for those who venture too close. figures emerge from the mist that rises off the black water. They appear for brief moments, ghostly and indistinct, standing near the shoreline or on the jagged rocks. Then vanish as quickly as they arrived. Observers describe them as pale shapes, humanoid but not fully corporeal. Their movements fluid and unhurried. Some report glimpsing features, pale faces that stare silently toward the lighthouse or out to the empty sea. The figure's presence is fleeting, yet it leaves a lasting impression of being observed. A subtle but undeniable sense of unease. The lighthouse itself seems alive with subtle activity. Lanterns within flicker even when no one is tending the light, casting long, wavering shadows along the spiral staircase and narrow gallery. Doors creak softly, responding to no breeze. And the smell of salt and mildew permeates every corridor. The structure is more than a building, it is a stage for phenomena that defy rational explanation. Where each stone and beam seems imbued with memory and presence. Where each stone and beam seems imbued with memory and presence. Visitors often feel the sensation of eyes upon them, a quiet awareness that follows every movement. The structure is more than a building, it is a stage for phenomena that defy rational explanation. Where each stone and beam seems imbued with memory and presence. Where each stone and beam seems imbued with memory and presence. Visitors often feel the sensation of eyes upon them, a quiet awareness that follows every movement. Where each stone and beam seems imbued with memory and presence. Where each stone and beam seems imbued with memory and presence. Faint chanting drifts across the water, carried on the wind in soft, rhythmic pulses. The voices are distant and indistinct, a chorus of syllables that no one can understand. Sometimes they rise and fall in intensity, synchronized with the movement of the mist or the flickering of the lanterns. Visitors report that the chanting seems to originate both from the water and the lighthouse simultaneously, creating an immersive soundscape that is at once beautiful and unsettling. The air vibrates with its presence, tugging at the senses and heightening awareness of every shadow and reflection. The path to the lighthouse is treacherous, yet the haunting does not remain confined to the structure itself. Along the narrow rocks and jagged shoreline, footsteps echo where none should exist. Some visitors describe the sensation of being followed by invisible forms, the faint brush of hands along their arms, or a cold pressure at their back. The black water reflects shapes that are not present, and the mist creates illusions that defy gravity and expectation. Each step forward tests the observer's perception, blurring the boundary between reality and something beyond. Visitors often witness interactions between the figures and the environment. Lanterns drift closer to certain forms, as if acknowledging their presence. Shadows shift independently of natural light, aligning with shapes that vanish when looked at directly. Reflections in the water show movement that contradicts the observer's position, creating a disorienting sense of depth and space. The experience is immersive, compelling the viewer to question the nature of what is seen, heard, and felt. Time behaves strangely around Blackroot Lighthouse. Visitors report that minutes can stretch into hours, and the repetition of sounds or movements can create the illusion of cycles that never fully resolve. The chanting rises at intervals, figures reappear along the shore or near the lighthouse, and lanterns continue to flicker in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Each element seems to exist on its own temporal plane, independent of natural measurement, reinforcing the impression that the site is a threshold between worlds. The black water, ghostly figures, and ethereal chanting combine to create a location of profound unease and fascination. Those who linger feel a persistent impression of being observed, guided, or tested by unseen forces. Even after leaving, the sensory memory of Blackroot Lighthouse remains vivid, the oppressive stillness of the water, the fleeting shapes on the rocks, and the haunting echoes of distant chanting. The experience is simultaneously beautiful and terrifying, leaving visitors with the sense that the lighthouse and its waters are alive, inhabited by presences that will endure as long as the tide. Black water absorbs light and sound. Figures emerge and vanish without warning. Chanting drifts endlessly across the bay. Lanterns float, shadows shift. The lighthouse itself holds stories in every stone and beam. Visitors leave with a profound awareness that some presences linger here permanently, watching silently, bound to the place in ways that defy understanding. The site stands as a monument to the unknown, a sentinel not only of the bay but of the unseen world that persists beyond perception. Hollow Bay Point juts sharply into the sea, its cliffs worn by centuries of wind and waves. The structure above the rocky outcrop seems fragile against the relentless pull of the tide, yet it stands, weathered and silent. By day, the waves crash against the rocks with a steady rhythm, and gulls circle overhead, their cries echoing along the narrow ledges. The outcrops themselves are slick and jagged, rising like the bones of some ancient creature, and visitors often feel the weight of isolation as they approach the edge. As twilight falls, the cliffs begin to take on a different presence. Figures are sometimes glimpsed moving beneath the rocks, their shapes fleeting and indistinct. They do not fully emerge into the light, yet their movements are deliberate, gliding among the stone as if the cliffs themselves were their home. The air grows cooler, the scent of salt and damp stone thickening, and a strange tension hangs over the outcrops, as though the land itself remembers events long past. Footsteps echo across the rocks above, precise and rhythmic. Visitors often report hearing them when the ledges appear empty, the sound carrying in ways that seem unnatural. The clatter of boots or the scrape of soles on stone reverberates against the cliffs, yet no one is visible. Shadows shift along the rocks, sometimes pausing at the edge of vision, only to vanish when approached. The feeling of being watched grows stronger with each step, a silent insistence pressing on the senses. The movement beneath the cliffs is hypnotic, almost ceremonial. Figures appear to navigate the rocks with ease, their presence deliberate and purposeful. They are often seen in pairs or small groups, moving in patterns that suggest a long-forgotten rhythm, a task repeated nightly without interruption. The water below churns and foams, reflecting the occasional flicker of moonlight, giving their forms a faint, spectral glow. Visitors describe a sense of reverence, as though these figures are guardians of the cliffs, carrying out duties beyond the understanding of the living. The wind whistles through the narrow fissures and crevices, carrying faint whispers that blend with the distant roar of the sea. Sometimes the sound resembles the shuffle of clothing or the subtle scrape of stone against stone. Even in the absence of visible movement, the air feels charged, alive with a presence that cannot be fully explained. The cliffs seem to pulse with memory, a deep, resonant awareness that something, or someone, is perpetually alert. At night, the figures move closer to the water's edge, yet never touch it. Their motion is smooth, almost liquid, and their outlines are distorted by shadows and the faint glimmer of moonlight on wet stone. Visitors report a chill that rises from the rocks, a cold that seems to seep into bones and linger long after stepping away. The footsteps above grow louder at times, tracing paths along ledges that appear impossible to reach, their origin impossible to locate. Their motion is smooth, almost liquid, and their outlines are distorted by shadows and the faint glimmer of moonlight on wet stone. The juxtaposition of movement below and above creates a disorienting effect, leaving observers unsure of where to focus, yet certain that they are not alone. The cliffs themselves hold many secrets. Small caves and inlets are often glimpsed, but difficult to explore. Within these natural recesses, shadows gather. Sometimes stationary, sometimes shifting as if to observe those who approach. The sound of scraping, whispering, and the subtle shifting of stone is constant. A low murmur that seems almost sentient. Even the waves contribute to the atmosphere, breaking against the rocks with a pattern that feels deliberate, as though synchronized with the unseen activity along the cliffs. Hours can pass in what feels like moments, and the perception of distance becomes unreliable. Yet their presence communicates intent. Sometimes pausing to regard the water or the cliffs themselves, as though conducting a silent watch. On their forms creates fleeting images, briefly revealing the contours of cloaked or indistinct shapes, only to dissolve back into shadow. The atmosphere intensifies during storms. The wind cuts sharply across the outcrops, the waves pounding the rocks with thunderous force. Figures appear undeterred, moving with certainty beneath the cliffs and along ledges that would seem perilous to the living. Footsteps above grow more pronounced, echoing through the stone and across the water, each step seeming to answer the roar of the sea. The sense of vigilance is heightened, as if the cliffs themselves demand respect and attention from all who traverse them. As dawn approaches, the figures retreat gradually, vanishing into shadows and crevices. The sounds above and below soften, leaving only the natural rhythm of the tide and wind. Yet the impression of their presence lingers, a memory etched into the rocks and the minds of those who witnessed them. Visitors often leave with a profound awareness that Hollow Bay Point is more than a rugged coastline. It is a realm of lingering watchfulness, a place where the boundary between the living and the unseen blurs. Hollow Bay Point endures as a place of mystery and quiet reverence. Figures glide beneath the cliffs, footsteps echo along impossible paths above. Footsteps echo along impossible paths above, and the cliffs themselves hold the memory of countless nights. The cliffs themselves hold the memory of countless nights, each one preserved in stone and shadow. Visitors feel the presence of watchers, the weight of history. Visitors feel the presence of watchers, the weight of history, and the certainty. The weight of history, and the certainty that the outcrops are alive in ways that defy explanation. The rocks, the sea, and the unseen inhabitants exist in perpetual harmony, observing all who dare to enter. The rocks, the sea, and the unseen inhabitants exist in perpetual harmony, observing all who dare to enter, and continuing their silent vigil long after the sun rises. The rocks, the sea, and the unseen inhabitants exist in perpetual harmony, observing all who dare to enter, and continuing their silent vigil long after the sun rises. Blood Willow Lighthouse stands perched on a jagged cliff, the structure weathered by years of salt and wind. Willow trees cling to the rocks below, their twisted branches reaching outward as if warning travelers away. By day, the lighthouse is a stark silhouette against the sky, its whitewashed walls cracked and faded, and the surrounding cliffs appear empty and silent. Yet as night falls, the area transforms into something altogether more unsettling, a place where shadows gather and whispers drift through the air. Visitors arriving at the cliffs report an immediate change in atmosphere. The wind seems to carry a strange weight, rustling through the willow branches even when the air is still. Shadows shift between the roots, crouching low and slipping silently across the uneven ground. Figures seem to appear and vanish, their outlines faintly human but impossibly quick, vanishing before any approach. The sense of being watched grows as footsteps echo softly on the rocky cliffs, never fully matching the movement of anyone nearby. The lighthouse itself seems alive with memory. The beacon at its top swings intermittently, though no one has touched it for decades. Lights appear and disappear within the tower, casting long, wavering beams across the cliff face and onto the water below. Observers report hearing faint creaks and whispers, as if the structure itself is speaking to them in a language they cannot understand. Some feel a cold brush against their arms or shoulders, fleeting but unmistakable, as though unseen figures are moving close by. The willow trees below the cliff are a labyrinth of roots and shadows. At night, visitors describe glimpsing crouched figures among the trunks, their faces hidden, their forms shifting with the fog. Soft laughter drifts upward, barely audible, carried on the wind, and impossible to pinpoint. The sound suggests life, yet there is none. Walkers along the cliffs feel compelled to pause, sensing movement in the periphery, shadows darting just out of sight. The combination of whispers, laughter, and unseen motion creates a profound unease, as if the land remembers old tragedies. Travelers report that the cliffs themselves seem unstable, yet there is no sign of erosion beyond what nature has wrought. Rocks shift subtly beneath feet, pebbles tumble without cause. And small vibrations run through the ground as if echoing from some deep source. Figures appear to rise from the base of the cliffs, scaling roots and rocks in ways that seem impossible. Climbing higher or crouching low depending on the observer's perspective. Leaving an impression of intent without communication. The water below the cliffs adds to the eerie scene. On calm nights, its surface remains unnaturally still, reflecting the lighthouse and willow trees in perfect clarity. Yet shadows move within the reflection, dark shapes that do not correspond to any visible figure. Visitors sometimes see forms lurking at the edge of the water, crouched low or gliding along the surface, vanishing when approached. Whispers travel upward from the water, mingling with the sounds of wind and creaking wood, creating a layered chorus of the unseen. The lighthouse keeper's quarters, long abandoned, remain a focal point for the unexplained. Lights appear in windows, flickering and shifting as if someone walks inside. The air grows colder in the immediate vicinity. And soft, deliberate taps and creaks echo through the rooms. Some visitors report the sensation of being followed when exploring near the tower. As though eyes are upon them at every turn. Shadows stretch across the walls, sometimes forming vague human silhouettes, only to vanish when examined directly. Night after night, the phenomena persist. Visitors hear whispers calling their names. See figures crouched among the willow roots. And feel unseen presences brushing past them along the cliffs. The combination of sound, shadow, and movement is hypnotic. Pulling observers into a landscape where the line between reality and apparition blurs. Even those who have walked the cliffs repeatedly report new figures appearing in different locations. New whispers that never repeat exactly, and a persistent sense of being part of a narrative they cannot fully understand. By dawn, the lights fade, the whispers die down, and the figures retreat into shadows. The cliffs and lighthouse seemingly empty. The willow trees sway gently, carrying echoes of the night. The lingering cold and the subtle sense of being watched remain. An environment alive with echoes of the unseen. Those who depart carry the experience with them, an indelible impression of figures crouched among roots, whispers in the wind, and laughter that rises from nowhere. The cliffs, the lighthouse, and the willow trees are inseparable from the stories they hold. Visitors leave knowing that Blood Willow Lighthouse is not merely a landmark, but a living archive of presence and memory, where shadows move, whispers travel, and the past remains vividly alive in the dark. Phantom Cove Light perches atop jagged cliffs, overlooking restless waves that pound the shore below. The lighthouse stands weathered and isolated, its paint streaked with years of wind and salt, and its beacon casting long, fractured beams across the fog-laden cliffs. Each evening, mist drifts inland from the ocean, thickening as night falls and swallowing the landscape in a silvery haze. The cliffs, treacherous and sharp, form narrow ledges and steep drop-offs, demanding careful navigation. As darkness settles, lanterns appear along the cliffs, glowing faintly without a visible source. Lighting paths that wind around jagged rocks and the base of the lighthouse, illuminating sections of the cliffs in a ghostly, shifting light. Visitors often report that the lanterns move slightly when unobserved, shifting closer or farther along the rocks, as if guided by an unseen presence. The soft glow adds to the tension, highlighting the jagged cliffs while leaving deep shadows where figures may lurk. Figures emerge from the rocks at night, appearing suddenly and silently. They rise from cracks and ledges, their forms shadowy and indistinct in the fog. Some are seen standing motionless on cliff edges, peering toward the lighthouse or into the misty cove below. Others move along the paths, their pace deliberate, almost purposeful. These figures vanish when approached, slipping back into the fog or blending seamlessly with the landscape, leaving only the sense that they were ever present. Visitors feel cold touches along the cliffs and paths, light brushes against their arms or shoulders that vanish as soon as they try to locate them. The sensation is brief but chilling, leaving an imprint that is difficult to shake. Some describe the touches as gentle guidance, as if the unseen presence is steering their movements along the narrow ledges, while others report sudden jabs of cold, startling and unnerving them. Each sensation reinforces the sense of constant observation. Shadows behave strangely at Phantom Cove Light. They move independently of the landscape, stretching unnaturally along cliff faces or across the mist. Observers see elongated forms that do not align with the shapes of rocks, trees, or the lighthouse itself. Some shadows seem to follow, maintaining a distance yet perfectly mirroring the movement of visitors, while others dart unpredictably, vanishing into the fog and reappearing elsewhere. This creates an unsettling sense that the environment itself is alive with unseen watchers. Inside the lighthouse, activity is reported even when it is empty. Footsteps echo along the spiral staircase. Faint murmurs drift through the halls. And the lanterns in upper levels flicker, casting dancing light across the walls. Figures are sometimes seen climbing the stairs or standing at landings. Their presence brief yet distinct. The interior combines with the exterior phenomena to create a layered experience of sound, shadow, and touch, leaving visitors constantly aware of forces unseen. The cliffs and cove below are alive with sound. Waves crash in patterns that echo like distant drums, blending with the whisper of wind through the rocks and lighthouse windows. Occasional murmurs or unintelligible words drift across the cliffs, forming a strange auditory layer that visitors cannot trace. Footsteps seem to echo along the paths even when no one is present, reinforcing the sense that Phantom Cove Light is inhabited by entities or memories beyond comprehension. Eyes are sometimes glimpsed in the mist, glowing faintly from cracks in the cliffs or among the sparse coastal vegetation. These glowing eyes, like the figures and shadows, seem to have awareness, moving and shifting in response to visitors' actions. The combination of eyes, figures, shadows, and lanterns creates a cohesive sense of presence that pervades every part of the cove and lighthouse. Nightfall transforms Phantom Cove Light into an immersive experience of fog, light, and unseen watchers. Figures move silently among jagged rocks, shadows stretch in impossible ways, and cold touches punctuate the air. The lighthouse beacon cuts fractured beams through the fog, illuminating portions of cliffs and cove, while leaving other areas in deep shadow. Every sound, touch, and flicker reinforces the impression of a place alive with hidden presences. Repeated visits reveal patterns. Figures often appear in similar locations along cliff edges. Shadows linger in familiar shapes. And the lighthouse staircase continues to suggest movement. The lanterns maintain their eerie glow, sometimes shifting positions subtly. Observers leave with a sense of continuity. An impression that the phenomena are deliberate and aware, connected to the location itself. Phantom Cove Light remains a place where perception and reality blend, and the ordinary rules of the environment seem suspended. Where perception and reality blend, and the ordinary rules of the environment seem suspended. Phantom Cove Light is more than a lighthouse, it is a nexus of natural and unexplained phenomena. Fog, cliffs, shadows, figures, and lanterns converge to create an atmosphere both beautiful and unsettling. Visitors depart changed, carrying memories of unseen touches, glowing eyes, shadowy forms, and lanterns that move without hand. The cove and lighthouse endure as a sentinel of mysteries, a place where the landscape itself seems alive with watchers that remain beyond comprehension, persistent and silent in the fog. Darkwada Lighthouse stands isolated on a jagged promontory, where cliffs drop sharply into the restless sea below. The lighthouse rises tall and weathered, its light faint and flickering, struggling against the thick fog that curls around the cliffs like restless fingers. Waves crash against black rocks, sending spray into the night air. From a distance, the structure appears almost alive, a sentinel watching over the dark waters and the shadows that gather along the rocks. Visitors to Darkwater Lighthouse speak of figures rising along the cliffs, speak of figures pale and silent, appearing without warning and vanishing just as quickly. Pale. They move with a fluid grace, their forms barely distinguishable from the mist that swirls around them. Move. Some observers catch fleeting glimpses of eyes that reflect the faint lantern light. Observers. And the presence of these figures is accompanied by a cold stillness, as if the air itself holds its breath. Presence. The cliffs seem to harbor these shapes, their rocks both stage and refuge for the apparitions that emerge each night. Cliffs. Lanterns float along the jagged rocks without hands to hold them, casting a soft unearthly glow across the cliffs and sea. The lights drift slowly, sometimes hovering near the figures, other times moving independently, as if guided by unseen currents. The illumination reveals only fragments of the scene, forcing the observer to fill in the rest with imagination. And every shadow seems alive, shifting and twisting in ways that defy reason. The lantern's movement is deliberate, almost beckoning, drawing attention to parts of the cliffs where the edge seems more precarious, and the rocks appear to shift slightly beneath the feet of those who approach. Visitors often describe the soundscape as equally unsettling. Footsteps echo along the rocks, sometimes matching their own, other times coming from directions that seem impossible. Whispers thread through the fog, murmured in tones that cannot be traced to any source. Occasionally, laughter rises above the wind and surf, distant and hollow, yet close enough to stir the imagination and chill the spine. These auditory phenomena are irregular but consistent, leaving a lasting impression that the cliffs themselves are alive, aware of intruders and guiding them with invisible hands. The rocks underfoot seem to move subtly, imperceptibly at first, guiding the unwary closer to the cliff's edges. Some describe a compulsion to follow the shapes or lanterns, an internal pressure that grows stronger as the mist thickens. The combination of sound, movement, and light creates an environment where human perception is challenged, and the boundary between reality and the supernatural feels dangerously thin. Time and space appear distorted around Darkwater Lighthouse. Visitors recount periods where minutes stretch, and the same figures or lanterns reappear in identical positions multiple times. The fog seems to rearrange itself, guiding observers along paths that loop back unexpectedly, leaving them unsure of their direction. The cliffs and rocks seem to shift subtly, creating an environment that is both familiar and alien. Every step forward is accompanied by the sensation of being watched, pursued, and gently manipulated by forces beyond comprehension. Those who linger on the cliffs often notice interactions between the figures, the lanterns, and the environment. Shadows twist independently of light, sometimes aligning with figures that vanish when approached. Lanterns move in tandem with footsteps, yet never collide with any obstacle, as if guided by invisible hands. Figures seem aware of the observer, pausing and turning in subtle motions that suggest both curiosity and warning. These interactions are fleeting but vivid, creating a cinematic tableau that is at once mesmerizing and terrifying. The sea around Darkwater Lighthouse reinforces the sense of isolation and unease. Waves crash with a rhythm that sometimes mirrors the whispering voices. A pulse that feels connected to the figures on the cliffs. Spray rises and drifts into the mist, obscuring vision and heightening the sense of unpredictability. The cliffs themselves are treacherous, their edges jagged and unforgiving. Yet the phenomena seem to draw observers closer. A quiet insistence that tests both courage and perception. Every visit leaves an imprint. The haunting is not limited to visual and auditory experiences, it is also physical. The air feels dense and heavy, charged with a presence that cannot be named. Visitors often report an unshakable feeling of being accompanied, a weight on the shoulders, or the faint touch of unseen fingers. Even after leaving the site, these sensations linger in memory, entwined with the recollection of flickering lanterns, pale figures, and cliffs that shift subtly beneath Oni's feet. Darkwater Lighthouse endures as a location of profound mystery, a convergence of sea, cliff, and spectral phenomena. Figures rise and vanish along the cliffs, lanterns drift without hands, whispers and laughter thread through the fog. And the rocks seem alive with subtle movement. The sight challenges perception, bending time and space, creating an environment where the living encounter the unknown. Visitors leave with a lasting impression that the lighthouse, the cliffs, and the dark waters are inhabited. Guided by presences that have endured far longer than memory allows, silently watching, subtly influencing, and eternally haunting the night. Thank you, my dear friend, for venturing with me tonight along the haunted lighthouse rocks of Maine. These cliffs and lighthouses hold more than light. They are alive with memories, shadows, and spirits that refuse to rest. If you ever travel along the coast at night, and fog rolls in thick, or shadows move along the cliffs, or lanterns appear floating in the mist, remember this. Not every shadow is harmless. Not every plank is safe. And not every figure belongs to the world of the living. Step carefully. Keep your lanterns close. And may the spirits of the lighthouse rocks leave you to return safely until our next haunted journey, my dear friend.